Hey everybody, Coach Jack here from Common Sense Keto. Today I'm going to talk to you about one of my favorite subjects, something that's very near and dear to my heart, and that is breakfast. So, no, breakfast is not a conspiracy brought to you by the Kellogg's Corporation trying to get you to eat their cereal. It's actually just some intuitive knowledge that has been lost along the way, especially in the ketogenic community with all their intermittent fasting frenzy that they're in. I'm going to actually explain to you what happens in the morning, why it's important to eat breakfast, and there is an actual physiological reasoning as to why it's important and why it's vital. So we're going to get into that now. So the first thing I want to talk about, which most type 2 diabetics will probably have heard of before, that's called the dawn effect. The dawn effect is where your blood sugar actually increases regardless of whether you've actually consumed any carbohydrate or not, whether you've consumed anything or not. So, and this happens every morning. Unless there's some physiological mechanism that's broken within you, you will have this effect. You will have the dawn effect. I'll put a link to that down below, some information for you about the dawn effect. It's very interesting. So the reason why this happens, why your blood sugar rises in the morning, it's not to give you a freebie of energy so you don't have to eat. It's actually a process which is meant to give you energy and give you focus so you can go out and get nourishment for yourself. This has been adapted over millions of years of evolution. So we would not have had all this massive levels of fat stores that we have now in most of our evolution. We would have been lean, we were hunters, we were gatherers, and we didn't have a bunch of fat stores. Food could be scarce at times, so fat stores were actually something precious, and we wanted to make sure that we always had them and that we weren't using our lean mass for energy. So eating in the morning was very optimal, but the problem existed that if you didn't have any glucose in your system, you wouldn't have any energy to go out and hunt. So our lovely bodies came up with this process in which when our blood sugar got low, cortisol would come up. It would prompt this process called gluconeogenesis, which would take some of our lean mass, it would borrow it, if you will, to make some glucose. And that glucose, along with the cortisol itself, would give us the energy and the ability to go out and hunt. It also did some things, because with cortisol, there's other adrenal hormones that are released. These are stimulants, and stimulants, as you know, if you drink a cup of coffee, strong coffee, the caffeine is a stimulant. It can reduce your hunger. So not only are you not necessarily hungry in the morning, but you also have energy. So most people take this as, I don't need to eat. I'll just continue and use this energy. Well, fine. If you do that, you will use that energy, but you're stealing away lean mass that you've taken to create that energy. So that's part of the problem. Okay, so the dawn effect starts off with what's called the cortisol curve. And I'll put a graph of that up above. The cortisol curve starts, the rise of cortisol starts sometime around 4 a.m. for most people and tapers off to a peak between 7 and 8 a.m. and then dwindles down pretty dramatically until about noon. And then from noon to 5, it's a gradual decrease. And then 5, 6 p.m., it pretty much tapers off to insignificant amounts. This is natural. This is normal for most people, hopefully, unless there's something, again, wrong with the system. You should have this curve. Everybody should. Now, what's also interesting about this curve is that insulin sensitivity seems to follow that curve. So the higher our cortisol, the more insulin sensitive we are, the lower it is, the less insulin sensitivity we have. And what that means is that we're best able to absorb nutrients, because insulin is primarily a nutrient absorption hormone. We're best apt to absorb our nutrients when that curve is at its highest. And when it gets to its lowest, we're least able to absorb nutrients. So if we eat following that curve, we're going to maximize our ability to be efficient with insulin. So insulin will go up, it'll go down quickly, and we'll be back to a baseline, which is what we want. We want to be at a baseline insulin level as often as we can so we can burn the most fat. Most people are already aware of this. So there is a saying, I don't even know where it came from, but it's way older than any of us are. You should eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, and dinner like a pauper, which essentially means eat a big breakfast, eat like a king, eat still a pretty hearty lunch, and then for dinner, be frugal. Eat a smaller dinner. And this completely falls along with what I'm talking about here, the insulin sensitivity following the cortisol curve. Now, next I want to talk about a little study. I'm not going to get into it in detail. I'll put the link to the study down below. It's very interesting. It basically shows that eating a larger breakfast, not even just eating breakfast, but a larger breakfast, showed gene expression for better metabolism and better insulin sensitivity. So this again follows along with what I'm talking about here with breakfast being important and following that insulin sensitivity cortisol curve. Next, let's talk about two different states, so nutritional states. So you have the fed state, which is when you're bringing in nutrients, you're bringing in carbohydrates or protein. We have nutrient sensors in our bodies that can sense these nutrients, and they switch us between the two states. So that's the fed state, when you're eating either protein or you're eating carbohydrate. The next is the fasted or the starved state. This is apparent to the body. This is known when you're only using fat or ketones for fuel. This is the fasted state. Now, if we think back to what happens with the dawn effect, we get a surge of blood sugar. That is carbohydrate. And with that carbohydrate, we get an insulin spike. So knowing what I've just said about the fed and fasted state, you're no longer in the fasted state once you hit that dawn effect. You've now got glucose in your system. You've now got insulin in your system. You're now in the fed state. So technically, you cannot fast through breakfast. You are breaking that fast by the simple fact of that cortisol rising, stimulating gluconeogenesis, and causing that blood sugar rise. You're no longer fasting. Whether you've eaten anything or not, whether you like to admit it or not, you are no longer fasting. So to skip breakfast, you are not continuing the fast. You're actually just stealing lean mass, using it for energy as glucose, and then when that runs out, you'll be back in a fat burning state. But you've already broken the fast. So saying that you fast through breakfast is not possible. So let's get back to the fasted state. So the body cannot tell the difference between actually using fat or triglycerides from the body fat stored or from dietary fat. It all looks the same. The same process happens. Fat comes in to the bloodstream. It gets broken down into glycerol fatty acids. The fatty acids get run through a system called beta oxidation. It produces another molecule which feeds the energy cycle, or the TCA cycle. It's the citric acid cycle, which creates energy for our body. This happens the same way, whether it's dietary fat or fat from your fat stores. It's the same. The body doesn't recognize the difference. Now, why this is important. If you get up in the morning and you decide that you're going to ride out this energy that you have and just use it and don't eat any protein or carbohydrate, you're not technically turning off the fasted state. You're just showing the body that you're still in the fasted state, and then you decide you're going to have a fatty coffee, and that'll get you through. Well, that doesn't signal the body that you're getting out of that fasted state, and it will still continue with your gluconeogenesis and your dawn effect, and it's still going to steal that lean mass. But because you don't turn on those sensors, the nutrient sensors, the body does something protective. It doesn't want to keep catabolizing lean mass or using lean mass for fuel, and it really doesn't want to use fat for primary fuel source either. That is not the intent of fat. Fat is a backup fuel source. Just because now we have tens of thousands of calories available to us in fat stores, it wasn't always like that. So the body's primary goal is to not eat itself, to not catabolize itself. So when you don't trip those nutrient sensors in the morning, and this goes back to that study talking about gene expression when you eat breakfast, it starts downregulating your metabolism to save yourself from eating your body, to save you from catabolism. And this is just a protective thing. Unfortunately, we can't undo all the millions of years of evolution by being overweight for a century. It's not going to happen. So despite the fact that we have all this fat to use, the body's not really all that interested in using it. And that's why people have a hard time losing weight. The body protects against it. So you don't eat breakfast. You just have a fatty coffee. Your body still thinks it's in that fasted state because it's only using fat for fuel. And it says, okay, whoa, put on the brakes. I need to stop myself from this catabolic state. I need to slow my metabolism and keep that from happening. Now, I'm not saying that skipping breakfast one day is going to cause you to trash your metabolism. That's not the case. It's chronic. Anything you do chronically is going to have issues. It's going to cause issues. It's going to cause your permanent metabolism to slow. It's going to cause your thyroid to slow. But again, one day of skipping breakfast, not the end of the world. You're not going to immediately do yourself damage. It's what you do chronically that's the problem. So fatty coffee, not the best idea in the morning. You need to get some nutrients into you and take advantage of that positive insulin state, that insulin sensitivity in the morning. Take advantage of it. Give yourself back that protein that you've taken for gluconeogenesis for the dawn effect. Give it back. Use it at the time when you're best able to absorb it, and then follow the curve for the rest of the day. There's nothing wrong with doing some sort of intermittent fasting, such as like a smaller eating window. There's nothing wrong with that, but just do it in the most optimal time. Do it, eat your breakfast, express those genes for better metabolism, for insulin sensitivity, and then stop eating by noon if that's what you want to do. From everything that I've looked at, considering circadian rhythms, the optimal window to eat in is 8 hours and fast for 16. Any more than that, there is really no literature out there that says it's any more beneficial. There's a lot of people out there espousing that intermittent fasting is the be-all, end-all, but there's really no literature showing any real benefit beyond an 8-hour window. So eating maybe 6 hours is marginally better than 8, but I haven't yet to see any evidence that that is the case. So if you want to intermittent fast, you can't skip breakfast. We've discussed that. You have your gluconeogenesis, your dawn effect happening in the morning. It's raising your blood sugar. Raising your blood sugar breaks a fast. So you can't do that, right? Fine. Take advantage of your cortisol curve. Take advantage of your insulin sensitivity following that curve. Eat to the curve and cut your eating later in the day. So eat for 8 hours and fast for 16. That is the best way to do all this intermittent fasting stuff. Stop skipping breakfast. It's the most important meal of the day. It always has been and always will be. And I think we need to get back to some of the instinctual wisdom that we've lost. So that is really all I want to talk about today. I thank everyone for listening. And if you got any comments or concerns or requests for future videos, put them in the comments below. I'm going to link to the couple things I spoke about, the dawn effect and the studies showing that breakfast increases metabolism, expresses genes for better insulin sensitivity. I think there's one I have too about correlating with better BMIs. I'll put that in as well. And as always, thanks for listening, and click on the subscribe button below.